Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Fallen London. Today's episode we are going to be carrying on with the exceptional story, The Thing That Came In From the Fog. In the last episode we found a secret cult, and we are trying to find out more information about the eerie mist by tracking down the horticulturalist and the coroner. I think we're going to start off here by going to the Botanical Reserve. The Botanical Reserve is a green and abundant snarl, twisted spitefully around the shattered hulks of greenhouses that were bested by their inhabitants. The air, as you approach, is hazy with pollen. The man-shaped fog sneezes. It's the first sound you've heard it make. The outer edges are relatively safe. Overgrown mushroom orchards, beds of dark, nocturnal flowers, ribald old men cultivating amusingly shaped vegetables. One of the latter warns you that the horticulturalist tends a greenhouse much deeper in. But you shouldn't venture further without a guide. That's where the serious flora lurks. Oh dear, so we could recruit a guide if we had 20 drops of business honey that we do not have. So I guess we'll be venturing in alone. You're not going to be frightened off by some overgrown daffodils with delusions of grandeur. As you battle your way through the reserve, a daisy chain hooks around your legs and tries to drag you to its nest. A weeping nettle hurls a dozen venomous barbs at you while you're hacking through the undergrowth. A bat fruit dives from its tree and makes a concerted effort to steal your hat. The man-shaped fog accompanies you without a care in the world, striding unharmed through even the most vicious vegetation. Occasionally, it glances back at you as you're fighting a tree. How can fog appear so smug? Despite everything, you arrive outside the horticulturalist's greenhouse without serious injury. Well, except the 12-inch thorn in your arm and the rash on your leg. As you approach the horticulturalist, he spins like a ballet dancer and launches his pruning shears at your face. It's a near miss. The shears embedded in a tree behind you, quivering. "Apologies," murmurs the horticulturalist, mopping his brow. "I thought you were a fungus tower. One has been stalking me for days. What do you want?" You notice that the tangle bush he was tending is bearing unusual fruit. Lumpen, misshapen, things that resemble the shriveled heads of monkeys. Okay, so we can ask him about the order. He was one of its 3 founding members. Why leave? "I've only ever had 2 passions," replies the horticulturalist. "Botany and the occult. My visit to the elder continent cured me of the latter, while elevating the former to new heights." The horticulturalist, having retrieved his pruning shears, is clipping away at the vines of one of his magnificent plants. The vines shrink sluggishly from the blades, like drugged serpents. Behind him, unnoticed, the man-shaped fog has approached the giant, tangled bush with its unpleasingly cranial fruit. It reaches out and caresses one of the fruits in a misty hand. Is it your imagination, or does the fruit's eye twitch? But let's ask about the enlightened Grand Master. You ask him about his fellow occultist. What happened in the Elder Continent? What did they hope to find there? "Our journey to the Elder Continent was a disaster," says the horticulturalist. The coroner caught his disease, the Grand Master vanished. I'd rather not talk about it. The only good thing to come of it was that I returned with a sample of this beauty." He rests an affectionate hand on the tangled bush. Its vines writhe contentedly, like worms on a rainy day. Okay, we can introduce him to the man-shaped fog. The horticulturalist must tell you everything about his expedition. It's the only way to understand this. The horticulturalist approaches the man-shaped fog, a look of wonder in his eyes. "You're right," he murmurs. "It certainly resembles him. Remarkable." He walks a circle around the fog, waving his hands through it. "And you say it's never talked?" You confirm that this is the case. The horticulturalist laughs bitterly. How unlike him. He retrieves a bottle of whiskey from a plant pot and takes a generous sip. "No idea why he's come back like this," he says. "After the coroner headed home, the Grandmaster and I, our relationship deteriorated. The coroner was the one who'd received the letters from the secret elders. I suggest that perhaps he'd been lying all along, that he'd falsified the manuscripts and the correspondence." Does he really believe that? The horticulturalist shrugs. The letters grew less and less believable as time went on. Almost like the coroner was seeing what he could get away with. The Grandmaster, though, he was a believer. After I voiced my doubts, he said he'd find the secret elders alone, told me to head home. So I did, and he never came back. He glances at the fog and corrects himself. Until now, I suppose. Okay, so we can say our goodbyes. He couldn't solve the mystery of why the fog's haunting your home, but at least he shone some light on the fog itself. "Good luck in solving this," says the horticulturalist. "The Grandmaster was a passionate fellow, prone to outbursts, occasionally unbearable, but he wasn't a bad man." If the man-shaped fog heard this, it shows no indication. "And pass along my regards to the coroner when you speak to him," adds the horticulturalist stiffly. "He may be an old fraud, but he deserves better than to be locked up in that wretched hospital." With a cough, he goes back to pruning. The fog drifts along behind you as you hack your way back out of the reserve, as enigmatic as ever. Oh, now we go to the hospital to find the coroner. Londoners are forbidden from travelling too deeply into the elder continent. As a consequence, they rarely get the chance to contract amnescence. Those who do tend to be explorers, adventurers, and spies. In a word, posh. As such, London's only amnescence hospital is an elegant, well-kept little building in a leafy corner of Hemlock Row. A footman greets you at the gates and takes your coat, pausing only momentarily in surprise upon seeing the man-shaped fog at your elbow. Inside, nurses walk slowly back and forth, speaking in calm whispers. Gentle, classical piano music echoes through the halls, thanks to a dedicated pianist in every ward. A large sign says "Excitement Forbidden" in very small letters. We can ask a nurse about the moribund coroner. Her nurse's cap is complemented by a blacksmith's apron and oven gloves. How bizarre. "I can take you to the coroner," says the unflappable nurse. "But this thing, whatever it is, must stay out of sight. She points at the man-shaped fog. Despite her evident surprise at such an unusual sight, her voice is as calm and steady as a surgeon's hand. Seeing something so upsetting could spell the poor man's end. The fog follows along at a distance as the nurse leads you to the coroner's private ward. She throws it the occasional withering glare and warns it to stay well back. You notice that every wall is lined with heavy blankets and buckets of sand. "You're the first guest in some time," she says. "I warn you, all our patients must avoid any strong emotion, or else their passions will consume them. Please be careful with your words." You walk past an open door. Within, you see the smouldering wreckage of a bed. A nurse on a stepladder scrubs at the charred shadow on the ceiling. I have a horrible feeling I'm going to make this man explode, and it's not going to be on purpose. "Who's this?" grumbles the portly old man from his bed. Even the linen is a soothing, muted beige. "I heard a note of irritation in your voice, sir," replies the unflappable nurse in a warning tone. "Please be calmer for your own sake. This is just a guest, that's all." She steps back and draws the curtain, giving you some privacy. The moribund coroner sighs. "What do you want?" He asks in a ragged monotone. The veins on his hands are pulsing and faintly luminescent. I could pass along the horticulturalist's well wishes, but I have a horrible feeling it might make him explode. Let's just start at the top. Let's ask about the order. He was one of its 3 founders. Why leave them? His brow creases, and the nurse assures him you weren't being accusory. The coroner looks for a moment, just for a moment, as though he's going to say something like "Pah!" or "Humbug," or perhaps just raise his voice a fraction. The veins in his hands glow brighter. The room is suddenly warm, warm enough to set you perspirating. Then, visibly, he calms himself. "I founded our order after discovering coded manuscripts from the Elder Continent," he says dully. "The Grand Master and the horticulturalist were old friends of mine, equally passionate about the search for esoteric truth. We founded the order together, and I established a correspondence with the authors of the manuscripts, the secret elders. They sent our order many coded letters containing powerful secrets and rituals." He exhales. A sickly light shines between his teeth. "One day, my order accused me of fraud. The ingrates said that the letters and the manuscripts were fake, and the secret elders did not exist. That's why I left. Since then, they have turned away from my teachings." The coroner stares at you blankly. Only the faintest irregularity in his breath indicates that he might not be perfectly composed. The unflappable nurse has poked her head around the curtain to keep an eye on you both. You notice she's holding a bucket of sand. "Anything else?" asks the coroner, "or will you leave me to my rest?" Let's ask about the enlightened Grandmaster. In a carefully neutral tone, you ask him about his fellow occultist. What happened in the Elder Continent? What did they hope to find there? "We were searching for the secret elders who had been writing to us," says the coroner. "We wanted to prove the rest of the order wrong when they said their correspondence was all faked." "Did he find them?" The coroner sighs, but not too heavily. No, I had to turn back after contracting this cursed disease. The Grand Master and the horticulturalist pressed on. So we can introduce him to the man-shaped fog. It might be too much for him to see his friend returned in such an unusual form, but you may learn something from the experiment. This is the ruthless choice. I don't feel like I want to let the man burst into flames. Let's pass along the horticulturalist's well wishes. You won't mention that he called the coroner an old fraud. Oh dear. The coroner's eye twitches dangerously. A little warm in here. Tell that arrogant nitwit he seems to catch himself. Make a conscious effort to calm down. What I mean to say is please do not mention that man in my presence. He accused me of perpetrating a horrific deception with no evidence, and then abandoned everything we'd built together to water his garden. Seems fair. Now, I do not have the heart to introduce him to the man-shaped fog, so we're going to move on. There's no need to risk the old man's life by introducing him to the man-shaped fog. Better leave him to his becalmed misery. You know what? Oh, I don't know. I kind of like, there's a small part of me that's like, well, he's just stuck in hospital. I might learn something and we might, end his suffering, per se. No, we'll keep him alive, I think. Let's say our goodbyes. Goodbye, you say to the coroner, keeping your voice neutral. The nurse places a hand on your elbow as she guides you out of the hospital. For future reference, we advise visitors not to use the word goodbye, she said. We found it can cause feelings of sorrow or regret. We prefer to use cheerio, ta-ta, or pip-pip, but only if they are said without joy. Oh. Well, I read those wrong then, didn't I? It should be like, cheerio, ta-ta, pip-pip. Okay, so now we have some days later. Your investigation has reached a dead end. You know who the fog used to be, but not what caused them to vanish and come back as a cloud of mist floating uselessly around your lodgings. So, for the next few days, you are forced to adapt your habits to accommodate your unwanted lodger. The man-shaped fog proves, as ever, an inconsiderate guest. It abandons jam jars unlidded, leaves crumbs in the butter, forgets to close the pantry. Everything it eats or drinks ends up in undigested puddles on the floor. After almost a week of such irritation, a letter arrives on your doormat. It smells faintly of soil. Let's open the letter. Dear Lady, it reads. It's the horticulturalist's letter. Your eyes flick cheekily to the final line. It's a letter from the ex-occultist horticulturalist. You jump back to beginning. As you may have spotted while visiting my greenhouse, my prize plant grows a curious fruit. Heads. It grows heads. Human-like in appearance, though I must admit they suffer in this darker, colder climate. Yesterday, I noticed that one of the fruits was growing a face I recognized. I must confess, I thought I was going mad. Had your visit left me febrile, delirious? But as the fruit ripened, it was unmistakable. It perfectly resembles the head of my departed friend, the Grandmaster. You must come at once. Bring the fog. Yours sincerely, etc., etc. Back to the Botanical Reserve. While you'd spoke to the horticulturalist, the man-shaped fog had touched the fruit of the horticulturalist's plant. Could that have been the cause of this? Did the fog contaminate the plant somehow, or inspire it? You will need to head to the botanical reserve at once. Quick, to the botanical reserve! You can rely on the man-shaped fog to accompany you. He hasn't left your side. When you arrive at the horticulturalist's greenhouse, having battled your way through the reserve once more, you are confronted by the truth of his words. Hanging from his prize plant is a fruit that you instantly recognize. It has the same jawline as your fog, the same arrogant lips, the same unedifying smirk. The horticulturalist professes bafflement. When you explain that you saw the man-shaped fog touch the plant, he nods thoughtfully. Perhaps the fog is botanical in origin, rather than meteorological, says the horticulturalist. If that's the case, its arrival amid the great fog was just a misleading coincidence. This warrants further study, wouldn't you agree? The fruit, the fog, what does it all mean? The horticulturalist has established an office of sorts inside the shell of a greenhouse. He's muttering to himself as he sorts through mossy stacks of botanical tomes and scientific papers. Occasionally, he scrawls wildly on a blackboard. He's asked you to aid him in his experiments. I'm a botanist, not a weatherman, he tells you grumpily. I'm going to try my best, but honestly, I need all the help I can get. But we need a sample for all of these, but I'm thinking I might need to go get a patent scrutinizer. But let's trap a sample of the man-shaped fog. Harder than it sounds, the blasted thing dances away from you like you're trying to take a pound of flesh. You'll need to strike quickly. As the fog is otherwise engaged, distracted by the sight of the strange fruit growing on the horticulturalist's tree, you sneak up behind it. With adder-quick reflexes, you trap a sliver of mist in a glass test tube and stopper it with wax. The grey wisp roils and seethes inside the tube like a captured storm cloud. I could try and go get a patent scrutinizer. Luminosity items in your inventory. After some digging, I realised that I could just buy one from Arrow Steel. It's quite expensive though. Patent scrutinizer, 28 echoes, but I can afford that, so let's go with it. Let's hope that actually unlocks something interesting, shall we? Put the fog under your patent scrutinizer. The fog sample needs thorough examination, and you have just the tool for the job. The horticulturalist hovers over your shoulder as you peer through the scrutinizer. The whole time, he looks as though he's bursting with questions, and only barely managing to contain them for the sake of your concentration. Finally, his willpower fails him. "For God's sake, my lady," he says, "what do you see?" The fog certainly isn't made of water droplets, you tell him. It looks like it's made of innumerable tiny cells, squirming, alive. Oh no, our wisp of fog has vanished. Let's see if we can trap another sample. It'll be fine. Let's search for a trace of a soul. The horticulturalist asserts that the Grand Master never dabbled with devils, worrying they'd interfere with his mystical powers. If the fog is him, it'll have a soul. teasing apart strands of fog with a long spoon and tongs. You sift diligently for anything that resembles a human soul, cross-comparing with your collection. As you do this, the man-shaped fog leans over your shoulder, watching your experiment with interest. Occasionally, it points at something irrelevant, as though it's trying to help. Hours of careful study prove it beyond a doubt. There's not a trace of a soul in here. I need another sample, don't I? I imagine he's getting kind of upset at this point. Wait, I can subject the rodents to a sample of the fog, or I can test the sample of fog on yourself. Oh dear. So for the rats, in the grand tradition of scientists throughout history, the horticulturalist suggests tormenting a rat to see what happens. This will go poorly for the rats, or we could spare the rats. How bad could it be? I'm not killing myself. Don't worry, we have quite a lot of rats on string, it'll be fine. I was under the assumption that rats on string were already dead, but who knew? You run the rats through some mazes. Then, using an eyedropper, you base them with dabs of fog. It settles into their fur like pollen on a bee. They go stiff as matchsticks and lie on their sides, breathing shallowly. One by one, the rodents expire. The horticulturalist's eyebrows raise almost beyond his hairline. You've been living with this thing, haven't you? As the horticulturalist says this, doppelgangers of the rats, composed entirely of grey mist, are emerging from the corpses. The fog rats scamper back and forth silently, occasionally sniffing the air. They behave much like their originals when tackling the mazes. They remember the routes perfectly. It's all going well until you show them a mirror. Upon seeing their reflections, each fog rat explodes, then dissipates into the air. Has he ever looked in a mirror? Asks the horticulturalist, pointing to the man-shaped fog. You remember an incident where the fog hogged your bathroom for an entire hour. Yes, it was able to look in mirrors, without apparent incident. Very strange, says the horticulturalist. It's a good thing I didn't test the fog on myself, there'd be two of me. A fog version and a me. At least, I assume so. I think we have as much evidence as we can hope for, says the horticulturalist, putting a final, mossy textbook onto his red pile. I could find nothing of use in these books, alas. Thank God for empiricism. We can arrive at a conclusion. It's a shaky conclusion, sewn together with threads of conjecture. But it's something. Everything points inescapably to one conclusion. The man-shaped fog is not made up of fog at all. It's made of fungal spores, coalesced into a human shape. The horticulturalist absorbs this. He sits. He thinks. I think you may be right, he says, finally. God knows there are stranger things in the elder continent. We can even speculate at a reproduction cycle, can't we? He begins drawing on his blackboard. The fungus kills the host and produces a spore cloud, which replicates the host's consciousness. A kind of fungal ghost. Maybe the evolutionary purpose is for the spore cloud, disoriented, to return to the host's home place where fresh victims can be found. And the trigger for the spore cloud to spread is... He draws a crude picture of a stick figure looking into a mirror with an upset expression. Existential crisis. As soon as the creature realizes it's just spores, it loses its facsimile of consciousness and explodes, spreading the spores. "Hello!" roars a sudden voice from behind you. It's the Grand Master's head. The horticulturalist is startled into a holly bush. The man-shaped fog is standing behind you, waving its arms. But the voice didn't come from the fog. It came from the head fruit, still dangling on its branch. "It's no use," mutters the ripened head of the Grandmaster. "They're still deaf as posts." "My friend," says the horticulturalist, turning first to the fog, then to the fruit head. "On the contrary, we can hear you perfectly." "Oh, you finally start listening, do you?" says the Grandmaster grumpily. "I've been shouting at you since we met. Have you any idea how annoying it is to be ignored?" Demand that the Grandmaster exit your lodgings. Aha! Can he hear you? Good. Time to finally serve an eviction notice. Let's ask him how he grew his head on a tree. I mean, we could explain that he's a highly evolved kind of fungus. Now, that may come as a shock, but let's not give him an existential crisis, just in case. Let's ask him how he grew his head on a tree. A head? From a tree? The head fruit seems to have trouble with expressions. It's not quite as malleable as a human face, but with great effort and a distinct squishing noise, Grandmaster manages to frown. "I have no idea what you mean." "The spores must have crossbred with a fruit," says the horticulturalist, "though I'm not sure why it resulted in this." Despite everything, you're no closer to getting the fog to leave your lodgings. Perhaps if you knew more about the type of fungi it originated from, you could make a plan. "All I can suggest is that you visit the Mythendrake office," says the horticulturalist. "They know more about flora of the Elder Continent than anyone else in London. Even me." Okay, well, let's demand that he exits our lodgings. "I have taken your lodgings as my own," says the Grandmaster's head airily. "At first, I only wanted to retrieve my chess set, but I took a liking to the place. I'm afraid you'll have to move your things elsewhere." "I'm very like you," says the horticulturalist with a sigh. "I remember when you camped out on my chaise longue for an entire summer. Every day you assured me you'd be gone by the morrow. I was on the brink of discovering the secrets of the universe, and you had the cheek to ask me for rent," says the Grandmaster. "I have always been beneath such material concerns. They serve only to distract the mind." Guess we're not getting rid of him then. Well, let's explain that he's just a highly evolved kind of fungus. "It's true," says the horticulturalist once you've finished your explanation. "In every sense of the phrase, my friend, you're not yourself." The Grandmaster's response is to chuckle ruefully. "Of course you would grasp at botany to try and undermine my triumph," he says. "Don't you understand what you see before you? Through fasting and meditation, I have astrally projected my consciousness from my flesh body in the Elder Continent. I am just glad to have finally unlocked the ability to communicate with you." No amount of persuasion will convince him otherwise. "Perhaps this is a good thing," murmurs the horticulturalist. "In our experiments, when a spore ghost realized what had happened to it, it died a second death. Perhaps the Grandmaster's arrogance is the only thing keeping him intact." You look the Grandmaster up and down. It makes quite a spectacle. A lumpen, ichor-dripping head, a body of roiling grey fog. Let's return to our lodgings. Visit soon, says the horticulturalist, attempting to shake the Grand Master's insubstantial hand. Despite everything, I've missed you, old boy. Now that the man-shaped fog has a voice, it seems keen to wear it out. I've travelled for hundreds of miles across the Z to get to London, says the Grand Master, drifting along beside you. As an astral projection, I was perfectly able to float, of course. As an astral projection, I was perfectly able to float. Of course. And the storms could not touch me. Imagine my disappointment when I arrived to find that I could not speak with all you miserable wretches still trapped upon the material realm. I suppose it is the price one pays for enlightenment. He keeps this up all the way back to your lodgings. And before I continue with this, I am afraid I think I'm going to have to end the episode. We shall find out more about the Grand Master in the next episode. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, subscribe, let me know what you think. Your comments are greatly appreciated. And as always, I'll see you next time.